Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how you can use this mould a little bit differently to create this. As with many of my videos, what you will be seeing is my first attempt. So you will be seeing what worked, what didn't work, all my trials and tribulations along the way, but most importantly, you will be learning an out-of-the-box method that opens up a world of opportunities. If that sounds interesting, stay tuned and enjoy the video. This is the main mould I'll be using today. It's a Trinket dish mould from Moulds and Shapes. It was going to be the only mould I used today, but I mixed up too much resin, so more moulds were introduced. But that makes life a little bit more interesting, doesn't it? I always mix up too much resin. Anyway, this is the mould where the magic is going to happen. I will also be trying out some absolutely amazing chameleon pigments from the Tiny Turner, which were sent to me from Toonpish Crafts, and she sells them on her website. So that was very kind of Wendy. So yeah, thank you, Wendy. I absolutely love these pigments, and I can't wait to show how amazing they are. So let's get started with the grand plan. My idea was just to use the rim of the Trinket dish at first. That's the first step. So what I'm going to do is use some of the pigments brushed onto just the rim of the mould, and it doesn't matter if they get anywhere else, they'll wash off later, but I will only be using the rim. The colour I went for is Arcane, and it's kind of like a pink and blue. Oh my word, you wait until you see it on the mould. It is stunning. So all I'm using is a soft brush to brush it on, and I will speed this up and then show you how it looks on the mould. You just wait. And just about now you'll start to see its beauty. Do you see? Oh my goodness. All those different shades appearing just from one powder. It really is something special, this pigment. Wow. It is a bit more expensive. All these pigments are quite expensive, but that's because they are real quality. Look at the vividness of that colour. My goodness, I couldn't wait to get some resin in there and see how it looked when it came out of the mould. The resin I've already mixed up is black epoxy from Let's Resin, and I absolutely love that stuff. Although, you don't need to buy black epoxy. You can get normal epoxy and just add some opaque black pigment. But this works so well. Any resin will do, really, within reason. Don't be using a deep pour resin, it will take too long to cure. But yeah, most regular resins will work for this. The idea is that you want it to still be bendy when you take it out of the mould, and most resins will be anyway after the full curing time. When it's just a small amount that you've poured, it will be bendy for a few hours at least when you take it out the mould. And then once they're out the mould, they do start to become more rigid. It's just the nature of epoxy resin. I know a lot of people panic when they first start with epoxy resin and they take things like bookmarks out of the mould and they're all wobbly. They wonder what they've done wrong, but no, they haven't done anything wrong. That's quite normal. And for today, we're really using that bendiness to our advantage. So once I'd finished the first mould, I realised I had way too much resin left. I always get it wrong. It's one of those ones where it's hard to guess how much you need when you're just using the rim. So I went through the whole same process again. This time I'm using the other of the dark pigments that came in the set of 4. I can't remember what this one was called. But anyway, I'm using the other one. and brushing it on another mould with a rim that I was lucky enough to have, thank goodness, so I could make two, which worked out good in the end. I was glad that I made too much resin and had to search through my moulds, and I found that one. So yeah, this is another gorgeous colour, just brushing it on in exactly the same way, and then I will fill that rim as well. And I don't know if you could tell, but with this mould, the pigment didn't want to cling to the mould like it did with the blue one from Moulds and Shapes. Those ones from Moulds and Shapes are really good for applying powder to. And yeah, it clings perfectly. But this one, it was very patchy. There were spots on the mould where the powder just did not want to stick. So this one I knew would come out not as good as the other one. But let's see. Let's see what happened when they were cured. Oh yeah, but before we do that, I did make two coasters as well because I still had resin left. And so I was able to use the other two pigments from the set from Toonpish Crafts. So I was really pleased I'd got a chance to try out all of them. And so yeah, I just brushed both the coaster moulds, two coasters. I brushed both of those with the powders and filled them with the black resin. And this coaster mould is also from Moulds and Shapes. It's the Oriental coasters. Right then, so now it's time to take my bendy circles out of the mould and see how they turned out. I'm being quite careful because obviously they're still very bendy and I don't want to stretch them or deform them in any way. So I'm just being very gentle and easing this first one out of the mould. And so here we go. I now have my first gorgeous bendy frame to shape it into the shape that I want it to be. But wow, those colours, oh my word. Yeah, loving the pigments. Thank you, Wendy. So yeah, let's get the other one out and see what that one turned out like. So this one's more of a purpley colour. And the difference in shades is a little bit more subtle. It's more of purple and pink, I suppose. I think the first one's my favourite, the Arcane. Absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, now I have two. So let's have a look at the coasters. So this first one I was very surprised at. I'd done both of the pale coloured pigments in this one and I really wasn't expecting them to come out in those colours. What a transformation. I know they're not impressive at the moment, but these are going to be the background. Later on I added some rub-ons. I don't think I filmed it, I just did it as an afterthought and put some rub-ons and then a top coat of resin, but I'll show you how they were when they were finished. I think I might have filmed it, I can't remember, I did this a while ago. You'll see soon. Okay, back to the Trinket trays. I needed something to stick them down onto and I decided to use my transfer paper. It's from Arteza and you use it when you're doing vinyl with your Cricut or other cutting machine, but it's a transfer film, just sticky back plastic basically. You could use Fablon, that would do the same thing. And the idea of this at this point was to bend my frames into the shape that I wanted them and stick them onto this to keep them in shape until they became rigid, which was the next day I think. So I've just started peeling off the back and then using sticky tape to stick it down onto a nice flat surface. It must be a flat surface. So now it's time for the fun part, making the shapes. So yeah, you can make most shapes really, bendy shapes. You're not going to be able to make a good triangle. But you can just use your imagination, and I was trying to do it kind of like paint splodges, but at the same time I was kind of thinking this has got to be a trinket tray. It needs to have a space that will hold things easily, so I didn't want to make it too obscure. But I did find that sometimes it was just looking rude, so I had to try and avoid making it look like something it wasn't. if you know what I mean. So yeah, I played around getting it into a shape that I liked, that didn't look rude, and then did the same thing with the other one. And obviously I'm sticking it down on the smooth side. The side that you can see at the moment is kind of ridged at the edges because it was at the top of the mould when I was pouring it, and that can be sanded when it's rigid, but at the moment while it's soft, I didn't try doing any sanding because it was just too soft. That will come later. But yeah, that's looking good, isn't it? Let's do the other one. So with the second one, I thought it would be fun to try and make it link into the first one so that they could both be put together when they're finished. I did actually change these a little bit after I'd finished filming, but not much. I just started fiddling around with it a bit too much and changed it. But anyway, it doesn't change much, so I'm sure you'll let me off, won't you? Yeah, so there you go. It links together now, and I think those two will look good when they're trays. Okay, so the next day they were rigid enough to keep their shape while they were not on the transfer tape. They still had a slight bend to them, but not too bad. And I was also able to sand them. I'm just using a nail file here. I'm not filing them flat, I'm just taking away any rough edges. And the reason I like to keep the ridge around the edges is because I'm going to be filling that ridge with UV resin later on, and it stops it from flowing over the edge. It contains it very nicely. So yeah, I'm just taking away any little sharp bits or sticking out bits, and yeah, so it's just a little bit of filing. Now we've reached the first point at which if I was doing this again, I would do it differently. The first thing is I decided to stick it back down onto the same transfer film that I'd used before because I don't like to waste things. Yeah, that, as you can see, there's some marks on it from before, and I should have thought about that. So that was my first thing. Not a major thing, as it turned out. The major thing with using this transfer tape for the next step was, even though I had it taped down really tight so it kept flat, I think as the resin cured, which I'm going to be pouring resin in this, and I think as it cured and heated up, it caused the transfer film to distort, and I got a kind of rippled effect in my finished piece, which in a way looked okay. Kind of looked like ocean, like the rippled water, but it wasn't ideal. So I need to think of another way of doing this. I'm thinking maybe a big sheet of acetate would work better. It's a little bit stiffer and it might not, distort in the same way. I'm going to have to try it. Maybe we'll have to have a second part to this video. We'll see what people think. Anyway, because I'm going to be pouring epoxy resin in there, I was concerned that it might leak underneath, even though it's stuck down to the transfer film. So what I decided to do was use UV resin around the edges and cure it just to make sure it's completely sealed and I didn't need to worry about the epoxy resin leaking out. So I did the same thing with the other one and cured them for 2 minutes. Next, it was time for some decoration, and I had these blue stones from Laura's Art Corner. Oh, I was so in love with them. I just kept looking at them. They've been on the side of my table for a while, and I just kept picking them up and looking at them because they've got that kind of shell-like quality to them. They're just gorgeous. So I wanted to stick them to the transparency film just in places to give it that extra touch of glamour. And so that took a while. I did it quite painstakingly, but I was pleased with how they looked in the end. And so there they are, both ready. So for the other one, I had another pack of stones, which had some purple ones in. So that's why one of them is slightly different. And so now I'm going to brush some teal coloured mica powder from Resin Pro onto my transfer film because it's nice and sticky and I knew that it would stick on there nicely. The only problem I did have doing this was, do you know where I put the UV resin around the edges to stop it from leaking? That wasn't sticky anymore. Sometimes you get like a tackiness to it, but it wasn't. It had cured too much and there wasn't any tackiness left. So after I'd finished brushing on all of my pigment powder, I had to add some more UV resin around the edge and just cure it for a little while before adding some more of this mica powder. That's the only issue that came from that, I've got to say. There we are, you can see it now, can't you? That bit on the left where the pigment hasn't stuck to it. Yeah, that's the UV resin. So let's sort that out now. So here, as you can see, on all the little patchy bits, I'm just putting a little bit of UV resin. I did one piece at a time and then just popped it under the UV lamp for about 20 seconds so it was still nice and tacky. And then brushed the powder on once again, and then I didn't have any patches where there was no powder. So it's time to add the resin. This is Let's Resin's epoxy resin, and so far everything's not looking too bad, is it? There's a few ripples showing though on the left hand side. Do you see where the transfer film underneath has rippled a little bit? Well, yeah, after adding the epoxy resin, that seemed to get worse, and you'll see soon. Some of you might say you actually like that effect, but I wasn't happy about that, and definitely next time I will change it. Anyway, I'm just adding enough epoxy resin just to cover the base of the dish. I want it to still be a dish, so, you know, well, a trinket tray. So I don't want the resin too deep, obviously. Right, so I took them off the transfer film when the resin had cured, and you can see all those ripples now, can't you? I wasn't really very happy about it, I've got to say, but they do look quite pretty still, don't they? What I did decide to do was use some more of the black epoxy from Let's Resin on the backs. I said before about filling the ridges on the edge of the frame with UV resin, didn't I? That was wrong. I'd forgotten how I'd done it. It was actually epoxy resin. Yeah, this is the problem when I make videos and then narrate them 2 or 3 weeks later. I forget what I've done. So yeah, anyway, it wasn't UV resin, it was black epoxy. And I'm just carefully putting it on and teasing it to the edges. And those ridges on the frames that I made really did help to stop it from flowing over the edge. So once that was cured, I was hoping that the ripples wouldn't stand out as much, but in a way, it made them worse. But it did make the colour stand out more as well. And yeah, I do like them, you know. I learned quite a lot doing this video. And at the end of the day, it's not the effect that is important with this video. It's the idea of making those shapes with your bendy frames. That's the whole point of this video, really. So to me, it doesn't matter that much that the finished look of it isn't as I wanted it. And so here's the coasters. These are with rub-ons. You know, for paper crafting, you just rub them on. And then I put epoxy resin over the top. But yeah, I just wanted to be able to show you those finished, and the colours look great. And with those rub-ons on top, it just brings them to a different dimension altogether, doesn't it? I love how these colours change in the light. And this one's my favourite. I love the rub-on that I put on there, and I love the colours. That arcane powder is my favourite. But look at it go from blue to pink. How cool is that? Absolutely stunning. I'm in love with that colour. And so we've come to the end of another video, and I really hope I've inspired you to have a go at making your own bendy frames and using your imagination to see what shapes you can come up with, but keep them clean. If you've enjoyed the video, as always, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to. And I will see you again next week. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.